All right. You sent me more. So let's go ahead and get started.
Why has there never been a woman president?
Most people vote boys
Why?
because they think boys are stronger than girls. Men don't want that to change to keep their hierarchy.
You know what that's called? Hierarchy?
No.
The patriarchy. Since the beginning of time, all the leaders of the world, majority are who?
Men.
Okay. Who has started every single war?
You know, I'm just gonna go hide and
Yeah, way to giggle there, Mom. You're making your son hide because you're essentially reinforcing this idea that there has been some sort of millennia-long attempt by men to simply oppress women, and that explains why men have held the majority of the political power or economic or social power. Like, that's the only possible explanation, right? It's just evil intentions by men to oppress women. There's no question that that's happened, right? There's no question that in certain parts of the world it still happens. But what I find interesting is that when you say verifiably false things like every single war has been started by men, that's just not true. That's just not true, unless, of course, you want to associate no real political power to the female leaders who have started wars. Not to mention the fact that, and Jordan Peterson has mentioned this before too, is that you are assigning to the entirety of men characteristics and features which have traditionally been displayed by a relatively small group of men, a small subgroup of men. That's one issue with this. You're also failing to mention that there's been a whole host of problems and issues and difficulties and frustrations that men have had to deal with at rates and at levels that women did not, that in many cases men dealt with as a way of protecting women or providing a safe environment for women. And so I don't mind you trying to explain to your boys that there have been problems or difficulties or even elements of oppression or systematic discrimination. I don't mind you teaching that, of course. But this idea that this is just some sort of uniquely male characteristic and that the only explanation for why we haven't had a female president is because men only vote for boys because they're stronger. You're doing a disservice to them. And I don't know, it says most men can't understand this. I'm making sure mine do. I hope they grow up to be actual men because I think what you're trying to raise are feminists. I think you're trying to raise boys that you can easily manipulate. We are living in the most feminist time in all of human history. I don't think you could point back to another time in all of human history where you could argue that it was less feminist than it is today. And you want to know which subset of women are the most unhappy? Young women, young liberal women. Young liberal women are reporting having been diagnosed with some sort of mental health issue at rates of over 50%. So I find it fascinating that now that you have achieved more advancements, not just legal protections, but legal accommodations than ever before in world history, you're the least happy, or at least the people that buy into that philosophy are the least happy. You would think, hey, we're winning. It's getting better. I would just encourage you to maybe consider that if your own ideology is making you more miserable, then there may be a problem with it. There may be something fundamental with it as opposed to just blaming all of men for all of mankind or for all of history.
One of the last courses I had to take to graduate is called Human Sexuality. I was asked very intimate details. There was no way to complete the assignment without violating my privacy. And we were to watch pornography in the class.
What is their stated justification for making therapists watch graphic material?
The chair of the department said that this course is a, quote, inoculation. I think the fact that I'm sensitive to that is a strength of mine. That is not a clinical liability.
Couple of things to unpack here. So to give you some reference, again, not only did I serve in the General Assembly for 10 years in Virginia, but I spent 4 years serving on the Education Committee, and I spent 2 years as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Higher Education. And we've got some real problems within higher ed in this country. And it's not just the fact that they are way overly reliant on taking your money through taxation as opposed to getting it through tuition, or taking it through another form of taking it, which is through the federalized college loans that they're constantly trying to get you to forgive, which means transfer it back to the taxpayers. But it's the ideological component. And now you could say, well, look, you didn't have to go to that college. Okay, but that college is already getting our tax dollars. Not to mention the fact that in many cases, not all, but in many cases, and a lot of times medical professions are one of them, higher ed and universities have worked out a little sweetheart deal. And that sweetheart deal is if you don't have a degree from one of their institutions, you don't get to legally practice, right? I mean, that's a pretty big incentive when they essentially say that there are entire industries which are cut off from you, which you are legally not allowed to participate. It doesn't matter how good you are. Doesn't matter how educated you might be, because educated is a broad term, right? Doesn't matter how in demand you might be. Doesn't matter how successful you might be. If you don't have the credential from one of their institutions, you don't even get to practice. You don't get to participate. Now, I want you to think about something. If you have worked out this deal where you essentially get money from people regardless of whether or not you provide them a good or service, because that's what tax subsidization is. You get stuff from people regardless of your ability to do anything for them. And you've worked out a special arrangement with the government where you have an oversized influence on the economic market or the industries for which people can participate, which forces them to come to you. And then what you do is you give them a whole host of courses that they are required to take in order to complete their degree that might have little to anything to do with their major. And then you're of the ideological mindset that it is your goal, that it is your objective, that maybe it's your responsibility to push a certain political ideology on someone. Well, gosh, the university is the place for you. And it turns out that in a lot of departments that handle things like this, you have an oversized critical theory view of the world. So it's oppressor oppressed. It's about removing traditional notions about sexuality, about removing certain moral notions about sexuality. And so I'm not surprised that they would force someone as a condition of passing the course to watch pornographic material. I also think that it's probably not a huge stretch to think that the people that are requiring this probably have motivations that go beyond your educational well-being. I think they're at the very least trying to shape the way that you view sexuality, and not from a standpoint of giving you a comprehensive viewpoint and letting you analyze things, but no, pushing a particular narrative on you. And this whole idea of, like, well, it's inoculation. Oh, okay. So what degree of personal experience with a particular issue or tragedy or trauma do I have to have in order to be sufficiently inoculated with it? What sort of personal information am I going to be required to share with you, professor or department chair, in order to be able to get the credential I need to go out and attempt to help people? So yeah, there's something perverse about this case specifically, but there's actually something perverse about the entire industry at this point. And I think that's really important to understand. Butterworth. This guy's great. Sergeant First Class Butterworth. All right, what do you got? What do you got for me?
Today I'm going to share with you something that took me entirely too long to figure out. I've been married for about 9 years, and up until about 4 years ago, I hadn't figured this out. That's probably not true. Maybe 2 years ago. Your wife or your significant other might complain about things, and that's totally normal. And the way that I've always done it is to try to solve those problems as fast as possible, because I don't like to waste time and I don't like to dwell on things. A relationship hack that I'll share with you is to not try to solve the problems and instead just listen. Here, let me show you. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. You're not even listening. Follow me for more relationship advice.
So this guy's great. He was in the Virginia National Guard, and he first started doing videos where, I don't know if you saw those ones with like the Bentley commercials.
Bentley.
Humvee.
Bentley.
Humvee.
Yeah, this guy's hysterical. The funny part about this is I think most guys, we're going to engage in generalized speaking here, right? Like most guys have experienced this where their wife has essentially come to them and said, hey, honey, I have a problem or whatnot. And the way the guys typically think about this is that if you're coming to me with a problem, it must be because you want me to offer you some sort of solution, right? Which is not an unreasonable assumption. And it tends to be the way how guys interact with one another. And a lot of times your wife will say, I just want you to listen. And here's what I'll say. That's not technically true. This is the way I've described it before. Your wife does not want you to just listen. No. What's happening is she's about to go on an investigation, and you are the you're the Watson to her Holmes, right? She is going through and she is analyzing the event that took place, the location, the people that were involved. She's going through her mind and reviewing testimony. And your job is to sit there and take copious notes, right? Your job is to, again, to be the Watson in this scenario. And you're not sitting there offering solutions because you don't even have sufficient knowledge or understanding of the scenario yet to be able to offer these solutions. Now, I will say this, gentlemen, beware. Because as you follow your wife down this investigation into what is bothering her, you may find out that you're the primary suspect. Right? Let me give a serious application of something I've learned from being married 26 years and getting this wrong at times and getting it right at times. For the first 7 years of my marriage, I was very much I tend to be, I can compartmentalize. Most men are kind of compartmentalized thinkers. The benefit of that is it allows us to kind of remove distractions and focus in on something very specific and really, really like just zero in on a particular problem and follow it. The negative part of that is sometimes we can ignore things on the peripheral. Sometimes we can get so obsessed with a particular thing or a particular way of thinking that we ignore other things or things that could be impacting it or whatnot. And what this means is that there was a lot of times when my wife would say, I don't know about this, or something happened, or can I talk to you about this? And she would start to go into all these details, and I'm just kind of like, just give me the facts. Like, give me the relevant facts to the actual issue. And what I don't understand is that in her mind, she was giving me those relevant facts because the way in general women think is they're not as compartmentalized. They make a lot of social, emotional connections between people, places, things, events, feelings in that particular event. And a lot of times guys feel like this clouds their analytical judgment, and it can. But a lot of times what it actually does is it allows for far sharper recall and allows them to be able to pick up on certain social cues that may not be as obvious. And so one of the things that I think is important to understand about the way men and women communicate on this and how we can actually be incredibly helpful to one another is not by treating it as if, well, men are just, logical and linear and compartmentalized and women are more emotional and social. And no, it's different ways that our minds process things, and they process those things for a reason, for a God-given reason. And I can't tell you how many times my wife has said something like, something's off about this, or I don't like this, or there's something not right here. And I'm sitting here asking for evidence. Give me data to justify your belief in this, right? Because I don't want to be driven by emotion. And a lot of times the process of her going through and explaining everything in great detail is because she's trying to paint the picture of why she feels a particular way. Now, again, the negative aspect of that is you can overly rely on intuition. The negative aspect is you can bring up things that aren't relevant to a particular conversation and actually confuse things. But when men and women appreciate for how men and women generally think about things, right? Generally speaking, I know you've probably got a sister that doesn't think this way or a brother that doesn't think that. Fine. Generally speaking. When men appreciate what women bring to the conversation with the detail and the talking about things and the setting things up and the framing, when women appreciate the way that men are able to focus on a particular topic and remove things that might not be as relevant as they assumed, what you can actually get is both people seeing a far more comprehensive picture of what's going on. You can actually get a far more rich and deep analysis of a particular situation, provided that both of you are focusing on, okay, it's not that the way Ben Shapiro says facts don't care about your feelings. That's true. But I care about my wife's feelings. And sometimes the feelings associated with facts can be relevant to the situation. We don't want to be driven by our feelings, but it's not bad to necessarily let them inform the way we're thinking about something, because feelings are an invitation to thought. Why did I feel this way? Why did that give me that, sort of instinct? Why did this not sit right? And then going through it and processing it logically gets you to that point where now you're like, that's it. And I know I've really learned to trust my wife's discernment on things. And my wife's also a very logical thinker. She's not, unreasonable or overly driven by, just intuition. But I found that when we come together and we talk about these things, we actually get a much clearer picture. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I found it relevant in my life, and maybe it will help you in your marriage. But definitely go and follow Butterworth. Guy's a crack up, man.